February event for the NGO Committee on the Family New York. Today's event is titled The Family, Charting the Way Forward Post-Pandemic. I will be the moderator today. I'm Ben Freer from Fairleigh Dickinson University and the co-chair of the NGO Committee on the Family. We'll be doing introductions later to maximize our time as we start the event. So today we are thrilled to be joined by two excellent speakers, Dr. Jenet Erickson and Ms. Melissa Villa. We are using a slightly different format today because Dr. Erickson is actually joining us between two of her classes. And so we'll need to leave the event a little bit early today. Thus, I'm going to start with an introduction of Jenet. We'll follow her presentation by a question and answer period. And then I'll introduce Ms. Villa with a questionnaire and answer period to follow that. So Dr. Erickson is an affiliated scholar at Wheatley Institution and a former assistant professor in the School of Family Life at BYU. Her research specializing in maternal and child well-being has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, US News and World Report, Slate Magazine, and the Today Show. She has authored more than 20 scientific articles and book chapters and presented at national and international conferences. In 2004, she was selected as a social science research fellow for the Heritage Foundation, where she completed research analyses on non-maternal care for policymakers. Erickson received a BS and MA degrees from Brigham Young University and a PhD in family social science from the University of Minnesota. She is currently a columnist on family issues for the Deseret News National Edition, while she and her husband enjoy their family life journey with two young children. So Jenet, take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be with all of you. Thank you for your interest in the family. I'm going to share my screen and then just take us through a few slides. I think it will help to look at some slides as we talk through this really interesting reality that's come from what I'm calling the COVID work family, the COVID-19 work family reset. And I think one of the interesting things is just after this is a few months ago, we have Megan McArdle writing from the Washington Post, and she acknowledges the problem of disasters, right, that are like we have experienced. And then she says this, but sometimes disasters can serve as kind of a reset button, knocking us out of old ruts and opening possibilities. And follows it with the COVID-19 pandemic has provided a unique opportunity to think about the kind of future we want, specifically in this area of work. Workers are thinking about what they want from a post-pandemic job, and the answer seems to be something very different from what they had before. Now, I was struck by her article because at the time when she wrote it, we were just pulling out some data as far as men's and women's in families, their preferences around work and what had happened because of COVID in this coming home from the workplace. And if it had done anything to shift attitudes and feelings about that. And I'll show you that it did. But it's helpful to just provide a little context. In 2005, I was a graduate student and part of a study called the Motherhood Study that was a nationally representative sample of mothers looking specifically at their experience with motherhood in the current culture. And one of the questions that we asked was what their current work situation was and what their ideal work situation would be. And I'm just going to pull out this chart and maybe just, if you just focus in on the kind of the royal blue marking on the left slide, it's 1%. That is looking at the percent of women who were able to work from home at that time, and then contrast it with what they saw as ideal. And at the time we had 30% of them selecting that as what they saw as an ideal work situation. But at the time, only 1% could actually do it. And so fast forward time, this just is highlighting that gap there. So on the right that we found in 2005, we have this pay from home option, and we just a tremendous percentage who acknowledge that that's what they would see as an ideal, and only 1% were able to do that. And of course, what happens in COVID is we see this shift because people had the opportunity to come work from home, and not all professions, obviously, but a whole bunch more than ever had before are coming home to work. Then the question that we asked last August was, what do you see as your preferred arrangement? And you can see in the slide here that mothers, 34%, 19%, right? This chunk of mothers said that working from home either most or half of the time was their ideal. And then look at fathers, and you see almost the same percentage. And you see all these fathers who also had the opportunity to work for pay from home, identifying that as their preferred arrangement. Now, it's interesting, having said that, one of the questions right off when all these mothers in particular went home, and you'll remember this, children were sent home from school, and so parents had to be home helping their children do online schooling. It was a tremendous transition. And the question at the time was, as we're getting reports from women and just writing about it, what's their experience? And the real concern was maybe this mothers going home, women going home, and they're now managing work and their children. And we don't know where the fathers are, if they're up in some closet doing their work, and mothers managing so much at home. Is this transition going to deepen inequity, undoing decades of advancement in gender equality? And what we find is this really interesting twist, that it actually seems to have opened up the possibility for a little bit something really different, which is an increased sharing of responsibilities and an honoring of preferences, because it wasn't just mothers who found working from home desirable. There was this tremendous shift in fathers' preferences as well. And you can see that 53% of fathers wanted to work from home either most or all the time. And among the college educated, it was 65%. It was even higher than among mothers. And what it meant is the follow-up question was, well, what do you see as the best kind of way to manage childcare? As many of you know, we've been in an effort with Build Back Better, this President Biden's proposal to really expand childcare availability in the United States and increase the number of children who are participating in childcare in that 0 to 5 age. And so the question was, well, what do families see as ideal that way? And interesting that because we've had this experience of being home, what you see show up is this tremendously high percentage of fathers and mothers who see as ideal this both parents working flexible hours and sharing childcare. And they got a taste of it during COVID, something that hadn't really been possible before, where we're actually both working from home and we're able to manage the care of these pre-K children together. Now, you'll just see that when we go down to the center-based childcare option, you see just a very small percentage, 8% of mothers and 14% of fathers, who would see that as the best childcare arrangement. Instead, it's managing this together as a couple, or one of us doing it, or engaging relatives, right? Or sharing it part-time. And that highest ideal is both parents working flexible hours and sharing childcare. So it was really striking to see that, especially given in the context of the proposals from the government. Now, I think it's what Megan McArdle was saying in that Washington Post article, where all of a sudden you get this new work family world that mothers in 2005 talked about because they had it as an option that they could fill out, but it was not anywhere possible. And then we had this COVID experience that brought something possible that we hadn't known could be possible before. And so what you see is that emerges as the strongest preference: father and mother sharing childcare while working flexible schedules from home. And so it's different than that entrenchment of kind of mothers doing all the primary care. It's this vision of a shared world around that, and doing it together as a couple for our family. So you'll see even among mothers working full time, 4 out of 10 identified this as the best arrangement. And the follow-up is that we could see that there are stay-at-home parents who are making the choice to be at home because they have young children who would like to be working, but they also don't want to send their kids to daycare. They don't want to have them in the care of strangers, if you will, would be how they would talk about it. But they didn't know how to do it. And this new work family world makes that presumably possible for some of them that it wasn't possible before. Now, this was all really interesting, especially in the context of increased cultural understanding that we really had entered, at least in the United States, this workist culture. Derek Thompson wrote about it a year before we had kind of the COVID reset experience. And he described workism, he called it workism, this rising importance Americans place on work as a source of meaning. And so different than in the past, work had really morphed into a kind of, he calls it a kind of religion, promising identity, transcendence, and community, that people were identifying with their work, both the setting of their workplace and right, you saw workplaces expanding and providing everything there, the gym, the eating place, right, to create this culture, this community. And it aligned with this belief that work itself was the source of identity and transcendence in an increasing way than had been seen in the past. And it also showed up in research on youth. When Pew Research did their report on the epidemic of youth anxiety, which you're all aware of, this dramatic increase in youth anxiety even prior to COVID, you had 95% of teens saying having a job or career they enjoy would be extremely or very important to them as an adult. And it ranked higher than any other priority, helping people in need or getting married, right, as being a high or extremely or very important priority. So he was just acknowledging, wow, we're really seeing this workist idea enter the consciousness of Americans and their youth. And he really questioned it. And he just said, a culture that funnels its dreams of self-actualization into salary jobs is setting itself up for collective anxiety. He was just kind of strong in saying, there's a problem if we're really seeing our identity so tied to this. A follow-up article wrote, when work becomes the centerpiece of life, the most valuable things in life suffer. Now, the acknowledgement was, we have talked about work family. That's my area of research, work and family, that the interface and how to reduce stress in that area. But typically what had happened is we were creating more job-friendly families, meaning we were putting in place policies that would facilitate more work as opposed to less work. And so the language would be more job-friendly families rather than family-friendly jobs. And so in a follow-up piece to this Atlantic piece, it was written, all too often people then end up in workplaces and on career paths that are hostile to family, not unlike what Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote in that piece that's been shared more than any other Atlantic piece, where she's saying to make the choice to choose family was really stigmatized. And in social spheres who treat norms, whose norms treat work as meaningful and family as burdensome. Now, what COVID did is really something interesting, because it allowed people to make choices around work and family that they didn't know were possible. And in doing so, as we look at their preferences now, we can see this prioritization of that family sphere, if you will, over the work sphere, because all of a sudden it was possible. Now, there's been some talk about a piece that Judith Warner wrote years ago in the New York Times. And what she was doing is she was looking at college-educated women, specifically from elite universities, from Ivy League universities, who had finished their degrees and entered professions. And then as they had young children, they had chosen to opt out of their careers. Now, we've long known that mothers, when they have young children, tend not to prefer full-time employment. That data has been very, very consistent across the decades of fluctuation in maternal employment, but that they tend to say, I've got to prioritize care of these children. But in this case, it was women who had all the choice. They were married, they had a provider, and they had access to really phenomenal work opportunities, and they were choosing to opt out. So she tried to understand, what is this? And what they described is that they had developed a greater appreciation of, in their language, of some of the values of home and connectivity that can be alien in intensive full-time careers. And so as children grew up and they were opting back in, they described having a little different ideal than they had before opting out. And the way they would describe it, what their ideal was more time with children combined with some sort of intellectually stimulating, respectably paying, advancement permitting part-time work. Isn't that interesting? Something we've had a hard time securing, but that's what they saw as ideal after they had opted out and were coming back in. They saw something different in what they wanted. And so similarly, I think what we're seeing in this work family reset that's related to COVID is we see among college educated mothers, actually part-time work became more appealing than it had been before. There was a sense of, oh, I've experienced more time that I can care for myself as well as for my children by reducing commute and all of the requirements of being on site, right, for work has opened up some other thoughts and some other appealing desires for me. And I think as we think about that, repeatedly, there's been this question of, well, why would families see this caring for young children at home as being so important? We all know my husband was in daycare at 6 weeks. He's a great person. Like we know it doesn't have to be a toxic, right, experience. And why is it that families feel strongly about this and continue to feel strongly about it? And it's interesting that even more than before, as we followed neurobiological data, and I think this feeds back into this idea of workism versus familism, what we know as developmentalists is that the infant brain, and if we just looked at what we can now see about right brain development specifically in that early period of time before left brain development starts, that becomes the foundation for well-being across life, that then continues across development, this brain development process, that more than ever before, we can see how that has to happen from within relationships with adults who are deeply invested in the caring of these little people. And so as this says, observing the self-organization of the infant brain has really confirmed that development happens within the context of a relationship with another deeply invested mind and body. It's not just a genetically encoded experience that's going to unfold, but it's really dependent and shaped on experience and a specific quality of social emotional experience, a quality that typically is best facilitated within the relationships of home and family. And I think what we're seeing more and more, in fact, with just the most recent findings about institutional care from Tennessee, is we're seeing what we've seen consistently, that there are questions about institutional care for young children. And I think as we understand brain development, we can see why this might be the case. It's not that it impacts their ability to read per se, or letter identification, those kind of skills that we feel are very important. But in fact, it can be positive. We can see some positive things, though we don't see those persist across time. But what it does seem to put at increased risk is social emotional development. So this is just one example of what we see in the United States, and we've seen, of course, in Canada, in the Quebec research, and we see internationally, even with really high quality situations of daycare, you just see increased risk for social emotional challenges. You can see that here with children who are in extensive early hours of daycare. It doesn't mean that daycare is always bad by any means. And for some populations, it can provide a better environment than what they might get at home. But for the ordinary family, there is associated increased risk. And it would be, I think, explainable when we can see what we can see developmentally about brain development and that the development of the person. So I think what you're seeing in this work family reset that's pretty remarkable is what I find so powerful about the study you probably have heard referenced before, the 75-year Harvard grant study. That is the longest longitudinal study that we have on record. And beginning with that early class at Harvard in the 1930s, they tracked these men, because it was only a class of men, and their lives and everything about their lives that you could possibly measure over a 75-year period to just see what really predicts well-being, what predicts success, even financial success. What is it that shapes the trajectory of people's lives? And you've heard that powerful statement when George Vallon ends the study, 25 years, $20 million, it's very expensive, right? And he says, happiness is love, full stop. And he just describes this last bullet. The entire takeaway of the remarkable 75-year Harvard grant study was that warm, deep relationships are the essence of happiness, meaning, and success throughout our lives. that foundation is laid in early development, and it is true across life. So I would say what we can tell from the work family changes that were set in motion through this COVID experiment is that there is an appreciation for what happens at home, and that these relationships that are core are really fundamental to prioritizing. Okay, I would love to take questions at this point, and I think we're going to transition into that. Thanks, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Such wonderful perspectives and thoughts of how we can be thinking about the return to life, and not a return to pre-COVID life, right? That there are ways that we can improve on what life is, rather than just having the goal of returning to that pre-COVID experience in time. I really appreciated your framing of, how do we think about jobs? Are they job-friendly jobs? Are they family-friendly jobs? And what that really changes in the way we conceptualize how work fits into our life. And so Ryan and I, not surprisingly, we're thinking very similarly about our question. And so I'll start there. With this reset that's becoming a possibility, and with data that you're referring to of mothers as well as fathers, do we see that desire for both mother and father working from home with these flexible hours? Is this so both of them can take an equal share of childcare and home responsibilities? Or is it maintaining kind of the status quo of years past, which is mom takes care of the children and the household, and dad, plays with kids every once in a while, right? And so when you're thinking about this data of the kind of work life experience they want, are fathers reporting that they want a greater role in the responsibility of being an actual parent rather than just a visitor or a play object in the family?
I love that question, Ben. It's like the question to ask, right? What is it saying about it? So as mothers, fathers, and we can see in that data that it was more women were identifying that as ideal. And I think we would expect, when people talk about a little bit of a lag between men and women, like men lagging behind this egalitarian view, I think that shows up, right? Even with this. But I think at the same time, it's also not been understood to be possible for men. And so you're seeing men say they want to be home. And I think that means also what we can take is they want increased involvement with their children. So you have all kinds of anecdotal things saying, I could actually go out on the trampoline with my kids, or I could, right, during the middle of the day, or I could have this time, or she could leave and I could pick them up, and it would take, a brief amount of time. And they didn't not like it. They liked it, right? They liked that opportunity to be more involved. And what we know from data is that the more men are involved at home, when there's that sense of him participating, then there's increased happiness. Now, at the same time, I say that, there are persistent differences in preferences around how much involvement men and women want in childcare activities. And I think we should feel free to say that's okay. It doesn't have to be. So for example, recent data that's looked at, if you rank tasks, like what would women want to do at home, what would men want to do at home? And you see a very significant difference, even when they highly value egalitarian dynamics. And she's going to say, I really do prefer doing these kinds of childcare things. And he's going to say, I really do prefer doing outdoor kinds of things, taking care of the yard. And so just recognizing it's probably going to look complementary in some ways, even as this is a coming together in a way that we haven't yet had the opportunity to do.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think your answer lends itself nicely to a question that Lynn has put in the chat about, with these complementary roles that the mother and father may be playing in these families, has that equity and increased responsibility actually resulted in happier, healthier families? Is this something that we're seeing people reporting?
Yes.
Because the other option, right, is that this could create additional opportunities for conflict, right? Where people are taking on responsibilities that they used to not have.
Yes.
So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I can say that two pieces of that. I can say that women's happiness, not having to commute. So this is other data sets, like getting rid of that commute, having more ability to be at home, not having to be dressed right in a certain way by a certain amount of time, those kind of things, that women were happier. And they said they were actually better able to take care of themselves. Like they had more time to take care of themselves, which I think is important. Now, having said that, when we look at, and this is Professor Brad Wilcox's work out of the University of Virginia, repeatedly, he's found this finding that the happiest couples are what he would call, what he's labeled a neo-traditional ideal, okay? So it's traditional in the sense that women do take a more primary role in childcare with young children, and men do take a more strong provider role. And I think what's happening that we see among women is they like to be able to be free to choose to prioritize time for children. So being the provider on whom the family depends for income can be a burden for mothers with young children. We see that in the happiness around marriage research. They want to be able to be free to choose. So his providing, in a sense, taking that primary role frees her to both participate in providing and prioritize what she thinks might be best for those young children. And I think if we look biologically, if we look physiologically at what, like the hormone, all of that stuff, there is something to be said for a complementary reality around that, those early years of child development. And women seem to have a sense of that, and they like to be able to be free to orient their lives in a way that feels best to them. And so he would say it's neo-traditional. It's fathers who are more involved than in the past. So it's new in that sense, but it's traditional in the sense that it allows her to prioritize where she feels is most important, including care for children.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So Wendy had raised the question, and I know that you had mentioned in some of the studies, the actual participants of, some of them were college graduates from Ivy League schools.
Yes.
Overall, are we seeing that these kind of patterns of findings that you're reporting are consistent across cultures and societies and nations? Or is this primarily in Western cultures that we're seeing this data?
Yeah, I have to be honest that I don't have a good picture of the international perspective around what happened with COVID in terms of work and family preferences. I can just say that I think when we facilitate people's choosing, it's always better. So if I looked across socioeconomic levels, we'd be sensitive to this data, thinking there are some women and men out there who cannot choose to be home. Like their work does not allow that. They would want that and they can't do that. And so that's why I think policies that help facilitate greater choice, which I think is why the child tax credit has been popular in some circles, because what it would mean is it's giving families access to money, as opposed to a massive expansion of daycare, for example. The alternative would be to say, well, families taking money and making their own decisions about how they want to orient their lives around those work and family decisions. Is that making sense? So I think what we do see consistently is greater choice. When we expand choice for families across socioeconomic levels, we're doing something that facilitates their happiness, their sense of well-being.
Right. Great. So why don't we, thanks, Wendy. One of the benefits, of Zoom is that we can actually see when the answer is addressed the question. So why don't we do one more question, and then we'll switch over. So Marcia had asked, when thinking about workism, do you believe that the COVID experience has moved us away from viewing work as, quote, promising identity and transcendence and community, and has COVID altered where we gain identity and transcendence? Does this provide us an opportunity to kind of rethink where we gain our identity and who we are?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. And I don't know that we have a clear picture. I think that's a pretty big shift, right? This going from a workist mentality that's been entrenched for some period of time. But I do think the more we converse about people's realities around relationships really matter. And my ability to strengthen those relationships at our core and to be present it makes my life better. So for example, early on, I did some data about work-family conflict and what facilitated, were there practices, this is before COVID, were there practices that facilitated a reduced conflict in those work and family, in that work and family world? And you would be just so curious that what showed up was dinner, having family dinner. Even if you went back to work after, facilitated a reduction in that conflict, and it led to increased well-being. And so I think when we can prioritize even just certain practices in family life, that whether it's there at the beginning of the day or there at the end of the day together or in the middle of the day somehow, right, that COVID allowed, what you have is a reduction in the tension around that, because people feel like they're able to protect the things that really facilitate well-being. And we know consistent rituals do that, even if it's like a 20-minute time. Even if you're actually working more hours, but you're protecting a connection ritual across the week for families, it's very powerful. And COVID did that. What it did is it opened up the possibility of protecting some of those connection time rituals. And so if we can, I don't know that we're like going to shift, as Marcia, like, are we going to shift from a workist identity? I don't know. But I think that this gave us the opportunity to really tap into things that matter a lot to us. And it felt good to people, including taking better care of ourselves as well as our families.
Great, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jenet. That was a wonderful presentation as well as a question and answer. And so I know that we've had a couple of other questions about getting some maybe citations or the links to articles that you reference, because people want to learn even more. So we'll plan to follow up with you afterwards and share out with our membership.
That's wonderful, Ben. I have a minute. I can post a couple of those. I can certainly post the daycare findings. Happy to do that right now.
Perfect.
And if there's anything else, yes. Thank
Perfect.
you all so much.
All right. Well, so we will now transition over to our second speaker for today to talk about how COVID has impacted work and families in the Philippines. And so our second speaker is Ms. Melissa Villa. She is the founder and executive director of Project Pearls, a nonprofit organization on a mission to help children and families break the cycle of poverty in the Philippines. Today, Project Pearls is much more than the Band-Aid charity it started out as 11 years ago. With a small dedicated staff supported by hundreds of enthusiastic volunteers in the Philippines and the USA, is now a heart-centered nonprofit that implements effective programs to educate, empower, nourish, and deliver healthcare to thousands of children and adults in a handful of underserved communities throughout the islands. While Melissa will be first to tell you that there are many contributors to this success story, it's her inspiring, resolute, and agile leadership that brings everyone together to work on the common mission to feed, educate, advocate, and work for the basic human rights of children living in poverty. Born and raised in Manila, Melissa emigrated to the US in 1987 and then earned an economics degree, then a master's in global management before returning to her home country to help meaningfully improve the lives of the poorest of the poor. In 2018, she was recognized by World Literacy Foundation in Oxford with the first Albert Schweitzer Award for exemplary contributions to humanity. In 2021, she was chosen as one of the Asia Pacific Kindness and Leadership 50 Leading Lights by Women of the Future. So it is my privilege and honor to introduce Ms. Villa and hear about Project Pearls. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning or afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Ben, for that introduction. I wish with Jenet, I wish we have that same options, same choices for the families we were helping in the Philippines. There's for the families, communities we're helping, there's not much really reset for them during this pandemic. So let me see. Okay. So just a brief idea how Philippines is dealing with the pandemic. It's very highly militarized. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our president in the Philippines. So we have the longest hard lockdown. There were curfew imposed. There's stay-at-home orders imposed, and there was even a time that the president said shoot to kill everyone who defy his orders. So there were hundreds of thousands of people who got arrested for defying his orders. So, so as of this month, there's 3.6 million cases of COVID and 55,000 deaths. We're the second largest death in Southeast Asia. So right now, we're over 57% vaccinated. This is just recently, but the last 2 years, there was a vaccination hesitance among the people because the first vaccine was from China. So, and of course, all the conspiracy theories online. So we always say we're all on the same pandemic, but we're on a different boat. So this is the community we're helping in the Philippines. This is just right in the center of Manila, like 15 minutes away from US Embassy in Manila. So this is their boat. So they don't really have a choice. They don't have the luxury of electricity, of electronics for home study. So these are the children. So yeah, let me just see the pictures. So this is the community we're helping in Manila. So the COVID in the Philippines lead to—
Melissa, it looks like your slides might have gotten frozen. We're still on the second slide.
Okay.
Are you, if you want, I could bring them up.
Okay, let me
in advance for you if
share
that would be
again.
easier.
Okay, let me see. Is it, can you see it now?
Yep, it's on the second slide right now.
Oh, yikes. I'm switching slide. Can you see it now?
No, it's staying on the second slide.
Oh, okay. Do you want to share? I don't know
Sure.
what happened. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Full.
Sorry for the—
No, it's not letting me
Oh,
move
no.
forward. Oh, maybe that was the. Okay. Here we go. So this was, so we were
Yeah,
here.
right there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the next slide. So these families live on and off garbage. So when the pandemic hits, everything's closed. So there's, you can go to the next slide then. Next one, yeah. So they live on and off garbage. So next slide. So people here, the main livelihood is scavenging. They scavenge for recyclables they can sell. And that also includes food. So they recycle food from garbage. So it's called pagpag. It's a Tagalog term for shake off. So next slide then. So when restaurants are closed, so they don't have food that they can recycle from garbage. So everyone, children have started to show signs of extreme malnourishment. And next slide, please. Oops.
Did I skip one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So before the pandemic, Project Pearls serves average 300 meals a day. But right now with the pandemic, because everyone's hungry or hungrier, we are now serving 25,000 meals a month, and people, our serving time is 7 a.m. and people will get in line like as early as midnight for the following morning. Yeah, second slide. Yeah, so we're feeding. So it's first come, first serve. For this community, our budget is only 600 family meals. So there's a long line because this is the only meal that their family will have for the day. So there was an aid at the start of the pandemic. They got an aid from the government, like monthly groceries, but it's only good for a average family size of 3 or 4. But the real average family size in the Philippines in this community is between 6 to 10. So it's not enough. And okay, next slide. Yeah, so long line. So this is just one of the communities we're helping in the Philippines. We have 2 other communities in the Philippines we're helping. Next slide. So, and of course, so when we started Project PROS 12 years ago, we only have 42 preschool scholars, and now we have over 700 scholars from preschool to college. And these are the same children that started with us 12 years ago. And of course, the pandemic highlighted the digital divide and the access to educational resources. So as an organization, we panic how we can help these children, our scholars. So next slide. So in the Philippines, Facebook is very popular because it's easy access and cheap. So for Philippines, if you access Facebook, it's a free data. So even public schools, they use Messenger, create groups. So we create groups with our scholars, with the family. So we do house to house for their modules, for their homework. So that's how we provide their educational resources. And we also had fundraising for laptops. So we give them access to internet, laptops, and other devices that they can help with their schooling. So schools are still closed during this pandemic. There's no plan yet to open the schools in the Philippines. So next slide. Yeah, so these are just just our scholars. Of course, their homes are not really equipped. They don't have a space for learning. And next slide. And yeah, so this is our learning center where scholars, high schools, and college can have access to laptops, printers, paper, internet access. Next slide, please. Yeah, and for our college students, we provide them their own laptops and mobile packet Wi-Fi so they can do their homework at home too. So how we help the family during this pandemic. Next slide, please. So it was a struggle at first that like our community leaders, they refused to get vaccinated. So we educate them, give them resources so they can learn what vaccine can do. So when our community leaders get vaccinated, their family followed, and then the communities followed too. So next one. So these are our community staff and leaders. Next slide. Yeah. So at first we were so worried that the COVID will spread like wildfire in that community, considering how their homes are very confined. But fortunately, there's very minimal cases of COVID, and we can't understand why. Maybe because their immunity have a high tolerance for, diseases or something. So next slide. Yeah, so bayanihan is a Filipino spirit of getting things done for a shared cause. So families helping families, communities helping communities. So these are donated vegetables from farmers, and so the Bayanihan spirit is very well known in the Philippines. So yeah, so next slide. Okay, next slide. So again, there's no reset for the families. There's our social worker is actually very busy because there's a lot of cases of incest or violence towards children, towards women. So yeah, that's all I have. So we're on a different boat in terms of our community.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was really powerful to see what families and children are experiencing in the communities that you're serving, and so clear the work that you all are doing being so essential to promoting the opportunity to return to a life of safety. What really struck me while you were showing the pictures and presenting was a reminder of, I'm a researcher that really focuses on trauma. And in trauma research, what we often see is that when an individual is in extreme distress and traumatic experiences, that really the focus has to be entirely on survival needs, right?
Correct.
Shelter, food, protection. And so with the families and communities that you're serving, they're really remaining in a traumatic experience that they have not emerged from. And so I'm curious as to how, what are the ways that you see that the community or the government needs to behave to promote meeting those immediate needs.
Yeah,
so that we can, look for a path for the fulfillment and resilience and prospering that Jenet was talking about earlier. Right.
Yeah, so actually these families are they're not worried about COVID. They're more worried about dying from starvation. And I remember I posted on Facebook, so the Manila mayor, where this community is running for president. So he's busy with the presidential campaign. And I posted these long lines of people in line for food. And I said, are you busy with the campaigning? Let's help each other. And then nothing. And then he sent someone from his office to the community with a printout of what I posted. And they're like, who is this person? So he's the founder. They've been helping us here. And they didn't offer any help or assistance. So I think I was red tagged for something. So yeah, so there will be a presidential election. Philippines is very rich in resources. It's just very, very corrupt from the bottom to up. So we're partnering with different NGOs with the same mission, and and corporations, like, we're getting food items from different food companies and restaurants. So that's how we're sustaining ourselves.
Through COVID, have there been changes in the job opportunities for the communities that you serve? Have you seen a great reduction in those opportunities? Or has that really remained the same as what you've had?
It remained pretty the same. Now restaurants are open, so people have more garbage to scavenge from, which is sad. Yeah, so our mission is to break that cycle of poverty on these younger generations by providing them scholarships. So, and we also have women empowerment program. We have literacy program for adults too. And I think there's so many, Philippines have that machoism mentality. So we also need to educate what does women empowerment means to men. And so it's a long haul work for us.
So and I've got a couple of questions that have been direct messaged to me instead of with the whole group. So I'm reading from those as well. When you talk to, if you do, to employers, what are they looking for in employees, and how are you, through your scholarships, trying to kind of position the children who go through your educational process with Project Pearls so that they'll be in a position where they can get employment? What's that path look like?
So we have different, many corporate partners in the Philippines. So they're offering on-the-job training for our college scholars, and so it will be a brighter future for our the scholars on our program, because we partner with a good organization, good corporation.
Great. So I think that leads to one of the questions that I have in the direct messages to me is, what are the things that give you hope that the work that you're doing is going to result in a better, country in the Philippines and a better world for the individuals that you're working with in your communities?
Yeah, I believe our scholars, we have 3 scholars that used to be garbage scavengers. They were grade school when they started with us. Now they're in college, one is graduating. So now they know that they can really dream, that their dreams can become realities. And these 3 young girls who started with us went to New York for the United Nations Summit for Women and Girls. So their horizon is wider, and they can really see a brighter future for themselves. So it's like from the garbage to New York. So we're excited, and they're also excited. They have bigger dreams and bigger aspirations, not just for themselves, but for their family to get out of poverty.
That's really powerful that you're able to make that connection, right? Because I think so much of what you've talked about today, right, are the difficulties and the real struggles of the communities that you're working with. But to have that clear picture of these young girls that likely started with you when they were in grade school, and to actually be able to see them in your memories transform, right, from what they were to what they are now and the leaders they can become. I have to imagine that really empowers you in Project Pearls for all of the things that you're continuing to do and what you can do moving forward. That's really powerful. So Tara has asked what the parents' perspective is, or how supportive are parents of having their children shift from something that's sustaining the family in the short term to something that's a much longer term goal, right, of education and improving their circumstances. So what's the parent response been?
So yeah, the parents are very supportive. So for our scholars, they'll get a monthly groceries. We check before pandemic, we check their attendance. So if they attended school 85% during the month and their performance are good, they get a monthly grocery. So the parents sometimes push their children. It's like, you need to go to school so we can all eat. So they're very supportive. And also most of the parents are in our literacy program too. So they know that, there's a chance that their children and the younger generation can really break the cycle of the generational poverty.
Well, that's such a powerful idea, because I think we probably all have experienced times where a group has suggested the solution to a problem is to provide more educational opportunities without recognition that has costs within the family as to the roles that those kids have been playing in other ways. And so the recognition that the only way to really get parental support not because parents don't support education in the
Mhm.
betterment of their children, but like we discussed before, you can only give away the short term if you've got a way to meet your survival needs, right? And so that grocery list funding is so vital, I imagine, to getting family buy-in and support, which, as we all know, is the only way this can be successful.
Correct.
So another question that we have is, are there other ways that you work with and impact the community? You've spoke, at length really about how you're providing food and services in that way, as well as educational opportunities. Are those the two that you really are focusing on with Project Pearls, or are there additional avenues that you're working with the families and the communities?
Yeah, we also provide free healthcare to the community. So in the Philippines, hospitals, public hospitals are free service, but then they have to pay everything that will be used to you, the cotton, the extra. So they don't have money for that. They don't even have fare or transportation fare to go to the hospital. So we built a clinic inside that community, and there's so many horror stories that I've learned in that community. Like we did a survey among, because the average size of the family is like 8 to 10 children. It's like, why are you keep having children?
Mm.
So, and there was a bill that was passed, like the reproductive bill, but Philippines being 90% Catholic, so the Catholics like telling people, you'll go to hell if you take any form of contraception. So that's why they keep having babies, and also not just that, for the work that they do in the garbage. They said their husbands, to do the work they do there, they need to be high or drunk, because sometimes there's like dead fetus, dead animals. So they come home, they're drunk or very high, and they want to sleep with the moms. And if they refuse, they'll sleep with the daughter. So it's like sacrificial on what can you do. So and they don't have birth control. So it's very complex. Their lives, yeah. So we provide healthcare too. And also we have women empowerment program. And yeah, so we have different educational programs. We have brain booster, we have after school program. Yeah, but our main focus is education, giving these children opportunities and resources to get ahead of their lives.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the work that you're doing sounds so amazing and so powerful. And just thinking of those, the 3 girls that you were talking about before, and that transformation is really something that I think will stick with me for a very long time, as to how I think about the ways that we can impact on an individual level, and the kind of impact that can have moving forward. So thank you so much for the presentation, for all the work that you're doing, for making the time to be with us today.